يغضبون عنا.
Welcome back. Amid growing concerns over the trajectory of the war, Israel appears to be signaling it will not slow down its offensive in Gaza, putting increased pressure on President Biden when it comes to enforcing his red line. The White House maintains that the strike that killed dozens of Palestinian civilians in Rafah will not result in a change in U.S. policy, and that it has not yet seen Israel launch a major operation. But the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, acknowledged today that even targeted strikes by Israel could still result in unspeakable tragedy.
We also see that even limited, focused, targeted attacks designed to deal with terrorists who've killed innocent civilians and are plotting to kill more, even those kind of operations can have terrible, horrific, unintended consequences.
Secretary Blinken went on to say Israel must ask itself whether those incremental gains against Hamas are worth the unintended consequences and costs for civilians. Israel, meantime, appears to be forging ahead with Israeli Defense Forces tanks seen in Rafah's city center, and a top Israeli official saying the war there will go on for months. NBC's international correspondent Raf Sanchez filed this report for us from Tel Aviv.
Hey there, with Israel stepping up its offensive in Rafah and the number of Palestinian civilians killed growing by the day, the White House is facing new questions about where exactly is President Biden's red line, and has Israel crossed it? Now, the line from John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, is that President Biden does not want to see a large-scale Israeli ground offensive involving lots of units, involving the levels of destruction that we saw in northern Gaza. And the White House believes that at this point, we have not seen that happen. But earlier today, a senior Israeli official saying Israel believes this war will continue at least until the end of the year. And that likely means that there will be more bloody days like what we saw on Sunday night when an Israeli airstrike igniting a firestorm in a camp for displaced people, killing at least 45. Many of them are women and children, according to the emergency services in Hamas-run Gaza. Now, the IDF releasing what it says is the initial investigation into that strike. They say they used 2 small bombs to target Hamas leaders meeting at a structure inside of that camp. But they say there was some kind of secondary explosion which caused that firestorm. They are saying the weapons they used were too small to have caused that fire itself. They are suggesting possibly there were Hamas weapons hidden inside the camp which caused that secondary blast. They haven't provided any evidence of that. An Israeli official also suggested to NBC News it's possible that a gas tank ignited. The Pentagon is also confirming a report we did earlier that the U.S. military has been forced to suspend the delivery of aid into Gaza by sea after that temporary pier off the coast of Gaza was damaged in bad weather. That is a major blow to the humanitarian effort at a time when the Rafah crossing, the main lifeline for food and aid into Gaza, remains closed. Now, an Israeli official tells NBC News that Israel has drawn up a new ceasefire proposal and has presented that to the American and the Qatari mediators. But at this point, Hamas says they haven't seen that proposal, and there is no indication right now that these talks, stalled for so long, are going to lead to significant progress.
For more on the situation on the ground in Gaza, we're joined now by Dr. Haleh Sheikhola-Salame. She is a family physician from the Bay Area of California who was in Gaza earlier this month treating patients and had trouble getting back to the United States after weeks on the ground there. Dr. Haleh, thank you so much for being here tonight and to share some of what you have witnessed during your time on the ground inside of Gaza. Let's start there. For people who have never been to Gaza or who maybe don't have friends who are there, talk to us about what it is like to be inside of Gaza right now. A contact I have constantly tells me that every day he feels like he makes a choice. Do I die inside of my house with bombardments, or do I die on the streets waiting to try and get food? How would you describe it?
Thank you for having me. Yes, I think in the time that I was there, certainly things changed, evolved. The Gazans in Rafah were having a new norm of living their lives, and then the borders closed, and that led to changes of what they were. Obviously, normal is not normal, but what they were trying to live their lives, and it is a situation where it's critical, and unfortunately, every Gazan probably knows someone who has died there.
You know, throughout this war, we have seen and heard about the injuries that many civilians are experiencing, oftentimes children, just from initial explosions of aerial bombardment, shrapnel injuries, things like that. But then as this has progressed, we've also heard from the UN and other agencies that more and more bacterial infections are spreading among the population as well. What were some of the illnesses you were treating while you were there, and what challenges were you facing as you tried to treat people who needed care?
Yes, as a family physician, I was doing outpatient work in Tel Al Sultan Clinic and dealing with a lot of infectious diseases. That's the acute diarrhea, hepatitis A, upper respiratory illnesses, things that you would see normally in any population, just more acute, more intense. And then on top of that, I tried to deal with the elderly with their chronic illnesses and the medications they had to, try to get to treat their hypertension and diabetes.
Let's talk a little bit about your way in and how you were ultimately able to get out. You were supposed to leave on May 15th, but I understand you ended up staying more than a week after that date because you weren't able to leave. Talk to us about that process and how were you able to eventually get out?
About a week after I entered Gaza was when the borders were closed to everyone, not just Gazans who were, on the waiting list to evacuate from, necessary medical or surgical reasons, but also for all of us, all the foreign nationals who were trying to leave. So it became a dire situation. We waited patiently. We had to work with the United Nations, the WHO, as we were under their protection while we were in Gaza, and also the Israeli authorities to ensure our safety out.
You know, I spent the first month of the war reporting on the border with Gaza. I've been in other conflict zones. And for me, that moment of finally leaving, even when I know I'm tired and need to go home, is difficult because I always think about how many people I've met and know who aren't able to leave. Did you have that same experience? How difficult was it for you, particularly as a medical professional, to leave and know that there were people there who still don't have the resources or care or basic things they need to survive?
That's really important. It was very bittersweet. I mean, I was privileged that I could go. There were a majority of people, the Gazans specifically, are not able to leave. And so when I left a lot of people I got to know at the clinic, in our organization. And the other NGOs, I left everybody behind in hopes that they will be all safe, and know that not everybody has the privilege to leave when they can.
And very quickly before we let you go, that facility you mentioned that you were working at, is it still operating? What is it like now?
Just last night, I saw the videos of the bombings and the fire that took place near there. And I saw a clip of bodies that were laid out on a white, covered with white cloth, right in front of the room that I worked at. It was very shocking to see. This is the area. I was just there a few days ago, and now they had to use it more as a morgue.
So where they were treating patients, they are now trying to identify bodies. Dr. Haleh Sheikholah-Salameh, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you for your work and what you do. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
This morning, with Israeli forces pushing to the heart of Rafah and growing numbers of Palestinian civilians killed, the White House facing questions on President Biden's red line and if Israel crossed it. Especially after that strike over the weekend, killing dozens in a firestorm at a camp in Rafah.
We don't want to see a major ground operation. We haven't seen that at this point.
How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken. And I kind of take a little offense at the question. No civilian casualties is the right number of civilian casualties.
But more civilian casualties yesterday after a new strike on this tent encampment killed at least 21 people, according to the emergency services in Hamas-run Gaza. Most of them women and children. The IDF denies the tents were in a safe zone. Israel also releasing an initial investigation into the weekend attack, which has drawn international criticism. The IDF says it used small bombs to target 2 Hamas commanders, but that a secondary explosion started the enormous fire.
Our munition alone could not have ignited a fire of this size.
The IDF says hidden Hamas weapons might have caused the blast, but offered no firm evidence. An Israeli official earlier said a gas tank could have sparked the flames. The Pentagon also confirming an NBC News report that the U.S. military has been forced to suspend aid delivery into Gaza by sea after a section of its temporary pier broke apart in bad weather.
And that American pier had only been operational for 2 weeks before that damage. The Pentagon saying it's going to take at least another week to repair. That is a major blow to the humanitarian effort in Gaza at a time when the Rafah crossing, the main lifeline for food and aid from Egypt, remains closed. Hoda.
All right, Raf Sanchez for us there in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you.
Tonight, Palestinian families fleeing Rafah any way they can as an NBC News crew saw Israeli forces pushing into the heart of the city for the first time. But the White House says it hasn't seen evidence of Israel crossing President Biden's red lines.
We still don't want to see the Israelis, as we say, smash into Rafah with large units. We still believe that, and we haven't seen that at this point.
While just outside the city, at least 21 people killed in an Israeli strike on tents along the coast, according to the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza. The IDF denying they attacked a safe zone. It comes just 2 days after an Israeli airstrike ignited this firestorm at a different camp, killing dozens of civilians. Facing international criticism, the IDF tonight revealing results of a preliminary investigation, saying it used small bombs to target 2 Hamas commanders, but that a secondary explosion started the enormous fire.
Our munition alone could not have ignited a fire of this size.
The IDF says hidden Hamas weapons might have caused the blast, but offered no firm evidence. An Israeli official earlier said a gas tank could have sparked the flames. Meanwhile, NBC News has learned the U.S. military has been forced to halt aid deliveries into Gaza by sea after 3 officials said bad weather damaged its temporary pier. This video showing part of the causeway floating away from the beach. It's the latest setback for the American aid effort after military boats washed up on the coasts of Israel and Gaza over the weekend, while a U.S. service member remains in critical condition after an accident on the pier last week.
Now, that temporary pier had only been operational for 2 weeks, and the Pentagon says it'll take another week to repair. That's a major blow to the humanitarian effort in Gaza at a time when the Rafah crossing, the main lifeline for food and aid from Egypt, remains closed. Lester.
This morning, new fallout after that deadly Israeli strike in Rafah over the weekend. An Israeli official tells NBC News it appears that an IDF bomb ignited a gas tank at the tent camp, sending flames ripping through the site as displaced families slept in shelters made of wood and plastic. At least 45 people were killed, according to the emergency services in Hamas-run Gaza. Many of them women and children. Hundreds more wounded. These three brothers lost their only sister. They say she was 7 months pregnant. The IDF said the strike killed 2 senior Hamas commanders. But amid international criticism, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling it a tragic incident and promising an investigation, though giving no sign he'll halt the military offensive in Rafah. The White House says the images are heartbreaking, adding Israel must take every precaution possible to protect civilians. The death toll in Rafah bringing protesters onto the streets. From New York to Los Angeles to Paris, where demonstrators clashed with police. Many of the families at the Rafah camp had been displaced several times already by the fighting, but were still unable to outrun the war. Why did those innocent people die? What was their guilt, this woman asks. Now they're packing up their tents once again and preparing to move on.
And the UN Security Council will meet later on today to discuss the Rafah strike. The UN estimates around 1 million Palestinian civilians have been displaced by the fighting already. And here in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square, people are hoping that ceasefire negotiations may restart this week. Hoda.
All right, Raf Sanchez for us there in Tel Aviv. Raf, thank you.